Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Daniel Tam Claiborne, and I'm Senior Associate at Serica Initiative. Serica is the sister organization of media company SubChina, whose mission is to convene a community of global changemakers to make a positive contribution to U.S.-China relations. We do this through a variety of initiatives, including promoting impact investing and ESG, combating xenophobia and anti-AAPI hate, as well as in particular by growing the next generation of U.S.-China social impact leaders. We're so grateful and thank you all so very much for joining us today for an exciting panel on superheroes, masculinity, and Asian American representation. Just to kick things off, we'll be doing a little bit of housekeeping. We'll be sharing links to Serica, our co-sponsor 1990 Institute, our speakers, as well as their organizations in the Zoom chat box below, as well as trying out the functionality of our Zoom poll. So get excited about that. We'd also love to hear your insights and comments as well. So please direct your questions for our speakers in the Q&A box. That's also should be on your panel below. Just as a reminder, we will please try not to speak and mute yourself. It would be wonderful, but we're very interested in hearing your thoughts. So please ask some questions and we'll have time to pose them to the speakers at the end. So before I go ahead and turn things over to introduce our panels, I'm delighted to be co-hosting this webinar today with the 1990 Institute. And I wanted to take a moment to introduce Grace Yu, who will tell you a little bit more about 1990 and introduce the video that was really the catalyst for this whole collaboration. So Grace, please take it away.
Hi, my name is Grace Yu. I'm the Vice Chair of the 1990 Institute. We're delighted to be co-hosting today's webinar with the Serica Initiative. With the Shang-Chi movie, a box office hit, we thought this is an opportune time to discuss Asian American representation in the media. So the 1990 Institute produced a short video to start a conversation. The movie portrays Shang-Chi with Western sensibility of masculinity, with Shang-Chi in his muscular form and using Kung Fu as his means to gain power. Yet, unlike other non-Asian superheroes, he did not get the girl. Shang-Chi's sister is portrayed as a strong female, which is a formulaic strategy to ensure the movie appeals to a wider superhero fan base. Nothing wrong to that. We applaud Disney for introducing an Asian American superhero character and the cast of Shang-Chi for their excellent performance. However, to advance the acceptance of Asian Americans as Americans, there needs to be more diverse roles with deeper character development for Asian actors. We also need to create our own platform to control our own narrative and make our community more visible. We need to build and motivate an army like BTS. At the 1990 Institute, we created a multimedia content platform to highlight issues that impacts our community, to help inform and educate those who want to know more about Asian Americans. Now, let's watch a short trailer of the Shang-Chi video to kick off our conversation.
After all the hype and anticipation, Shang-Chi finally hit the multiplexes. The result? Even COVID didn't stop people from coming to the theater. The movie has a golden opportunity to rewrite the narrative around Asian masculinity.
Traditional stereotype of Asian men has been docile, meek, the perpetual foreigner.
But is this really a cultural watershed moment or more of a marketing opportunity to ensure profit for Disney's shareholders? Time to buckle up. Let's dive in.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Grace. For anyone who hasn't seen the video, I highly recommend it. We'll also be dropping the link to that in our chat box. So feel free to watch it after this talk or just play it simultaneously over me talking. It's totally fine as well. It is my great pleasure now to introduce the speakers for today's event. I'll keep the bios short so we can have more time for conversation, but the link to our event page has their full bios if you'd like to take a look. So first up, Kaiser Kuo is editor-at-large of SubChina and the co-founder of the Sinica podcast, the most popular English language podcast on current affairs in China, now with nearly 400 episodes. So welcome, Kaiser. We also have Minji Chang, who's an actor, producer, podcast host, and entrepreneur based in Los Angeles. Minji was former global executive director and now serves as board member of Collaboration, a nonprofit focused on discovering, connecting, and elevating AAPI artists. Welcome, Minji. And finally, we have Bing Chen, who serves as president and co-founder of Gold House, the premier collective of Asian founders, creative voices, and leaders dedicated to uniting Asians and Pacific Islanders to enable more authentic, multicultural representation and societal equity. Welcome, Bing, and please join me in welcoming all of our speakers today. Before we kick things off, I think we're going to do our first foray into the polling world. So we can go ahead and get that started. We'll be showing the results of all of our polls at the end. So we do hope that you are able to participate. While you're looking at that, I'll just kind of start off with a question for everyone. One thing that I thought was really interesting, the video brought up really nicely, was just how much of an outsized impact popular media and other cultural arts have when it comes to proliferating or refuting stereotypes. As Asian Americans growing up in this country, we've all had lived experience filtered through the ways Asian people are depicted in movies, books, etc., which may be quite different, actually, in fact, from how younger generations view themselves today. So I was curious, just to start things off, if there were some experiences that have stuck with you in terms of what Asian American representation has meant to you throughout your life, as well as how it might feel differently for Generation Z growing up today. So we can go ahead and start with you, Kaiser.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, I guess I grew up in a time where, Asian representation was negligible. I mean, we had Hop Sing and Sulu, and that was about it. Fortunately, my children are growing up in a very different era. I have a 17-year-old girl and a 15-year-old boy. They grew up in Beijing. They spent the first 10 and 12 years, respectively, of their lives in China. And on coming here, it's been really interesting to see how they've reacted so differently. And I think it's really telling. My daughter was completely immune to the blandishments of American popular culture and has instead been just very fixated on the East Asian culture that she loves, Japanese anime and manga, Korean pop music, of course. K-pop is huge in her life. Her room is a damn shrine to BTS and other acts, and even Chinese popular television. My son has not been a consumer of Asian popular culture at all, but he has been a huge beneficiary of its popularity in America. Because, I mean, as a 15-year-old boy, I mean, I grew up in an age of, total sexual invisibility of Asian men, and he's just got all the ladies just they're kind of nuts about him. It's kind of funny. So I envy them. I think it's quite telling about how things have really, really changed.
It's good genes, Kaiser. We'll chalk it up to that. So.
No. My wife's anyway. Yeah.
We can turn it over to Minji. Any thoughts from your end?
Well, I grew up in California in the Bay Area my entire life, and I was, born in the 80s and 90s kid and avid consumer of pop culture. I think from a really young age, from the Paula Abdul, Debbie Gibson day I was very, very young to be consuming that. So hats off to my parents. But I was, watching TV, film. I was obsessed with MTV early on, listening to radio. So I was really influenced by everything that was going on in the predominantly mainstream culture, which included hip hop and R&B. So a lot of Black culture that I grew up with. So I was, not aware of my invisibility, but whenever I did see it peak out, like All American Girl with Margaret Cho, that was a huge celebration point for me. Wept when I watched Joy Luck Club as a young girl, just because those moments are so striking and so rare. But I also did grow up with 90s K-pop. So there was some part of me that, with HOT and Turbo, to any, old school K-pop fans, there was that wave that started back then. And I held that as a point of pride for me. I kind of carried that with me into the ASEAN Pride days that I got to live through in middle school, which is very kind of this moment. And I'm actually really curious about what led up to that. But there was kind of this duality. I felt like that was something that was relegated to kind of church and home and kind of my Asian friends, but not really, there's a different part of me that existed in the mainstream in school and in different social circles. So there's this really peculiar dichotomy, which at this point I'm very grateful for, but certainly very different than now, where I think it's a lot more integrated and kids nowadays are seeing more representation and not feeling that, othered of themselves, like kind of split into two different worlds. Hopefully it's more one.
I agree. Yeah, hopefully it has become a little more cohesive. I will say I love your comment about Joy Luck Club. I think half of all the references my mom makes are still to Joy Luck Club, so still somehow still extremely relevant. Bing, what about you?
This will probably be an unpopular answer, but I was a third culture kid across Asia and North America, and who was always just inspired by real life superheroes who rebalanced equity and opportunity. And so my heroes were Gandhi, Mother Teresa, MLK Jr., and Walt Disney, three of which, as far as I'm concerned, are Asian. And so I never felt like I wasn't seen. If anything, we were crushing it. Walt Disney in my mind was Mickey Mouse, and Mickey Mouse, of course, has black hair. And so I assumed he was, and therefore Walt Disney were indeed Asian. So yeah, again, I realize it's unpopular. It might come from a privileged perspective, but if I looked at the real world history set of heroes, they're Asian. And I felt that, that was really affirming.
I love that. I never thought of Mickey Mouse as Asian, but
He's Asian.
We can own, we can reclaim Mickey Mouse. I think this is great.
Okay.
I'm going to stick with you just for a little bit longer, Bing. Male masculinity is changing, certainly from the days of when we were growing up, and the world is becoming a lot more, I would argue, gender fluid. I think as a kind of turning away from this idea of toxic masculinity. And I think there's some things that the video pointed out as well, that Grace, you mentioned as well in your introductory remarks about Shang-Chi not getting to kiss the girl at the end. This idea that Asian American males are still kind of desexualized in certain ways. But I was curious from your perspective, thinking about traditional roles for Asian American men, what does Shang-Chi get right about masculinity, and where are some areas where we still have some room to go?
Yeah, I'll start with the punchline. I think progress is always only invites questions. And so I think the two punchlines from these questions are, one, we have to celebrate the right things publicly and critique the wrong things privately. Said another way, we have to find what resonates and perpetuate those more broadly, and then use what's missing as improvements. The second piece is that more is more. We are kidding ourselves if we think any single piece of art is going to hit every single narrative. Goldhouse actually worked on development and production of Shang-Chi. And I can tell you, across establishing a superhero, blending authentic superpowers with modern powers, getting the third culture narrative right, thinking about geopolitical issues of when was like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on and on and on of things that have to be balanced. And in the same way that Crazy Rich Asians absolutely does not reflect the entire Asian diaspora, because we are the most diverse race in the world, so too Shang-Chi can't either. And so that should actually be a rallying call to say that more creative is more for all of us. I think some of the questions that all of us, I guess, emulatively challenged ourselves with were, one, sure, Simu is physically strong and a really great affirming character and person who's been really outspoken. So I think that's something that the film, and just honestly in real life, he gets right for sure. Was I perturbed that it's the only effectively MCU superhero that doesn't get the girl? Yes, that was annoying. Right, there's no question. But then when I get annoyed by that, I then have to question my own sort of masculinity and say, does the girl even want him? Does Awkwafina even like him? Why is it that her Deus Ex Machina of shooting that arrow and really turning the tide of the final act, why is that not enough, right? Why is her place to serve him? And I think that's problematic. And then I think other questions of, not to be too woke, but like, what even is masculinity even more? And more importantly, why does it even matter, right? In a world where strength is starting to be defined in different ways, exhibit A, money, like, why does it matter if you can lift and bench like 350 or rather squat 350, bench 250, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I say this, by the way, as someone who can do both of those things. And so I think that's the question as well. And then I think the final thing is, once again, and this is just one-on-one minority challenge, and I'm not knocking our community, but we are kidding ourselves if we expect anything to solve everything. That is not the way the world works. Even Earth doesn't work that way. We are proving that with carbon emissions and the fact that we're going to have to get out of this continent and world in the coming decades. And so I think, again, we just have to be real with ourselves that as minorities, we have to do twice as much to get half as far. And the only way around this is to, again, be very honest privately, celebrate the right things publicly, and start investing in each other more and more, because more creative is going to enable more stories and more visibility.
I love that thing. Yeah, more stories and more visibility. Absolutely. Yeah. Kaiser, what's your take, and also maybe what is your son sort of weighed in on kind of Shang-Chi's masculinity vis-a-vis his own experience?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't had particularly deep philosophical conversations about, what this contributes to the discourse on Asian masculinity. I mean, I think he just thought, hey, that was badass. That was really cool. Which is, about what I would have thought at the age of 15, which, I think that we shouldn't necessarily expect anything more. I think Bing had some excellent points about, how we've maybe unnecessarily problematized this Aquafina role in there. I think, you're right. Just turning the tide with that well-placed arrow, getting rid of that, the soul sucker or the mega soul sucker. That was enough. I didn't even think about that. It was just sort of a strange thing. I would echo pretty much everything that being said. I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm not sure why those criticisms need to be done in private. I have no problem whatsoever in airing those publicly as well as the praise. So I'm not exactly sure why you make that distinction, but I mean, I think sure there's you probably have your reasons. I'd love to hear them maybe in another conversation with you separately, but.
Happy to share if there's not.
Yeah. Well, actually, I mean, why not now? I mean, tell them
sure.
why in private? Why not have those maybe more difficult and challenging conversations publicly as well?
Yeah, it's a personal preference, to be honest. And I think this is ultimately a stylistic thing. I think, let me draw a couple lines. When something existentially wounds another community or another individual, those things need to be pronounced at the forefront. Exhibit A is the Me Too movement. If you are existentially hurting someone in the workplace, you should get found out, and we need to have those conversations publicly. But I find that more often than not, critical critique of creative actually doesn't serve anyone but the person who's critiquing themselves. And while that may be good for their ego, the reality is a couple-fold. Number one is, as a creator, as an investor in film, I know how difficult it is to create creative because it's your existential pronunciation of who you are. And whenever you get any critique, it's almost like, oh my God, my entire life is sort of questioned, right? Now we can debate all day long that creative should just grow bigger spines. The reality is that sort of sentiment really exists, and it's actually also a strength of creativity. The second and the biggest reason we don't critique publicly is because the second you do is the second the system doesn't take you seriously. Because think about it. If you're a big studio, you're a distributor, you're a financier, and someone poo-poos your work, are you going to call them again in the future? I guarantee you won't. In fact, there's so many Asian organizations that are well-meaning that have done this, and they can't get a call with anyone, not even a junior level person at a studio. I think that the path to progress is both complicit with a system to enable it to be better, while also building our own separate systems, which is why I'm an independent film financier and all that sort of thing. Right. And so just to give you a specific example, there have been several instances where rightfully the community has been really upset at different creative projects, particularly in film. I can tell you that the ones who are in the room fixing it are often not the people. And actually, in our case, they are not the people who have sort of decried those projects publicly. They are instead the people who've been very thoughtful, those of us who put hours and hours and hours behind the scenes to get these studios right. And by the way, we have made tremendous progress because of it. And that's that. But that's just my personal opinion. That's our style. Everyone has, I think, whether it's journalists or otherwise, their own different approach to things. The kumbaya side of me says, I think all are necessary, but I think the question is more, where do we want to be effective and how? And in our attempt at efficacy, is it actually sustainable? Once again, in the case of a lot of these big studios and distributors, you decry publicly, guarantee you go to the bottom of the list.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. I mean, we don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. And yeah, I get the case for wanting to circle the wagons and not air those things publicly. But I mean, there are times where I feel like something crosses a line with me. I feel like if I don't say something and we all acquiesce in this particular representation of something, that becomes, it's too much for me to take. So yeah. But yeah,
I agree with you, man. Like, yeah, especially when it's existential, like 100% agree. There was like a recent instance where I won't name them, but like there was a network who was basically casting a really overly sexualized and reductive version of a Korean waitress and used parlance that was incredibly misogynistic. We called them on, they got rid of it, and they're now rethinking the entire storyline. So those are instances where existential wounding, plus it just resonates of all sorts of challenges our communities face, those absolutely need to be called out. But I think in other cases, if we don't call it out publicly, I wouldn't call it acquiescence. I would actually call it, in our case, it's very productive tweaking, including in 2 different storylines in Shang-Chi that we privately critiqued.
Minji, I was going to turn it over to you because I'm sure you have a lot to weigh in on here as well.
No, I love this conversation so much. And I think I want to add to what Bing is saying, because I've been kind of in both spaces of being an independent artist and having my creative space and everything, and also being an actor. So I'm kind of at the mercy of the system, but also being a community leader in terms of running an organization that is strategically and intentionally trying to alter the system from within, and trying to find that balance of like, where do you flex, where do you leverage, where do you exercise strategy and patience, and that kind of like the entirety of this conversation we're having today, because I think there are certain roles and people out there. I think with Bing, it would be unwise in a lot of instances to just like spew his thoughts openly in an open platform about X, Y, and Z, about criticisms. And I've personally, thought about those things too when I wore certain hats, and like how to exercise the powers that I have available to me. So I think that's for every individual to figure out for themselves. If somebody like Kaiser, who's an amazing podcast host, I think that forum is like a great place to like have open dialogue and have criticism on culture and call people out, because that's kind of like what you're built to do, and that's your platform. So I think kind of putting more nuance to this, and like not just being binary yes or no. I think there's certain places and times, it always depends on who's speaking on what, to whom, in what platform, and that kind of consideration and thoughtfulness is the thing that's going to move us forward. Because I do rely on people. I want to know what the people think. We need to know what communities and what the grievances are. Not that we can cater to all those things, because like being said, no one thing can fix everything. Right. And what is to be fixed, right? That's also my question as an actor and as an artist. Like, why do we need to fix everything? And it's just because this one person or these group of people think that this thing is problematic. So thank you guys for talking about that and asking this question.
Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective, Minji. And as a podcast host yourself, I'm sure that is, as one of the many hats that you wear, it's something that, is kind of directed into that fora as well, when you're thinking about all of these questions. I wanted to stick with you for just a minute too. We've been talking about masculinity, or kind of as being saying, what even is masculinity? Why do we have to sort of define it in this sort of narrow way? But thinking about the strong female characters that are portrayed in both Shang-Chi as well as in the Eternals. We've got Awkwafina, of course. We've got as Sean's best friend. We've got Meng Zhang as Xiaoling, his sister, and then of course in the Eternals we have Chloe Zhao and Gemma Chan. And I was wondering, from your perspective, in what ways have these characters or others, subverted Western stereotypes of Asian and Asian American women? Bing, you just mentioned this very problematic depiction of, this kind of Korean waitress. So do you feel like these depictions are actually serving, to provide a better narrative going forward of what an Asian American woman is, as well as maybe in some ways has it also reinforced the stereotype as well?
Yeah, I hope I can answer this question. And this is just my personal opinion, of course, but I think that, the growing number of roles and having words to say, I've been cast in things where I've been relegated to being a prop, basically, having no words, having no agency, having no background, story arc development. The fact that these women are at the forefront, that they are, integral parts of the story and the narrative, that they contribute to the movement of the story is incredible. And I think having personalities that are subverting the previously very problematic stereotype of being docile, or the dragon lady, or in the geisha, we've definitely made leaps and bounds outside of that, which is incredible. And knowing Nora personally, she's an incredible person that started as a YouTuber and as a rap artist, and so she's done so much to kind of just be personally expressive of her own personality, where she comes from in Queens, and just lending that to the narrative everywhere that she goes. So I think we have done a lot of work, but there are obviously there's a lot of room for growth, right? There still are few leading parts, I'd say. There's still who is in the writer's room. I'll say that both as like a spectator and as an artist matters a lot. I've read script upon script about characters that make no sense to me, that come off as a caricature of what somebody thinks that an Asian person or a woman reacts to or thinks, or how they exist in the world. And I think that there's a lot of value in that story coming from the source. It matters that it comes from somebody who's lived having a period, having, microaggressions, being scared of sexual assault at every corner, and not going to places when it's dark. That experience comes from something that's lived in. The truth comes from that. So we do have a long ways to go. And, it's suffice it to say, I'm not poo-pooing on anybody, but, there's so many more roles and so many other ethnicities and narratives that have not been told yet in any sort of major way. We've had a lot of East Asian depictions, which is incredible. And I'm very fortunate to benefit from that. But I'm also aware of our Southeast Asian sisters and our South Asian sisters and so many other people that fall under this umbrella of Asian American that have not been given the spotlight. And we're working on that. So I think that's the space where, I also want to say, as an actor, I've had personal gripe, and I've talked with other East Asian actresses, at least, about makeup and how those reinforce things like makeup, wardrobe, the music, the hairstyle, that can reinforce the perpetual foreigner effect in a very subtle way, which can be hard to detect. And you just kind of don't know why. Why doesn't this person feel like somebody I know on the street versus somebody that's coming to me from, from a far off land, and that can reinforce that perpetual foreign effect. So there's a lot of nuance to it too. These are personal things I've experienced and that I've observed and talked with amongst all these other creators, and we're working really hard to grow out of, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Minji, and yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that sort of that subtlety and that nuance is what we need more of. And even to your point earlier, being the idea that Crazy Rich Asians, of course, it didn't capture the holistic Asian experience by any means, but just having more stories, more representation on the screen is going to serve our community better going forward. So I just kind of wanted to touch on that point a little bit more too, and I'll go to you, Bing, for that. This idea that maybe kind of in a reductive way, Shang-Chi, focuses a little bit more on the cultural context. The Eternals is a little bit more agnostic to ethnicity when you kind of think about sort of the plot lines and the arcs and the character development. How do you think Asians have been viewed by Hollywood in recent years? And I guess from your perspective, both as someone who's working within Gold House, as well as kind of your own personal lived experience as well, how should Asians be represented on screen to really earn a seat at that table going forward?
Yeah, I think that there's no real consistency on how we're being perceived in media, which is at once an opportunity because we get to sort of define those things, but also a challenge because, to Minji's astute point, it's the sort of, whether it's perpetual foreigner, model minority myth, and so forth, a lot of these pernicious, visages like continue. And so we have to at once dismantle those by redefining them. I think the punchline of at least how I approach things is always dual. So we have to be affirmed because of, but also in spite of, different versions of ourselves, whether different elements of ourselves, whether it's our ethnicities or race at writ large, our genders, orientations, our socioeconomic incomes, our faith, and so forth. And again, at once, sometimes we need to lean into those, and we do, and other times we don't. And neither is right, neither is wrong, by the way, but more is more, I think, at the end of the day. I will say, when we are able to bridge the two, I think that's when I'm personally, just as a fan, that have found the sort of most liberating creative. One example of this is Parasite. Parasite was, without question, a globally resonant criticism of socioeconomic disparity, but was uniquely, of course, Korean. There's about to be another film next year that we were just speaking about, Everything Everywhere All at Once, that I think similarly leans into both the strength of one's ethnicity and how that can impact one's relationships, whether it's your spouse or your daughter in that case, or yourself, but then also is strong and interesting in spite of just race, because it deals with the multiverse that in theory is globally and universally resonant. And so I think, again, it's this annoying dance back and forth, but I think that's just what it is to be Asian American, is what it is to be a minority.
Absolutely, yeah, and I love your point on Parasite as well. I think we'll touch on that in just a second. But I wanted to throw things over to Kaiser too. Kind of been thinking about masculinity in China specifically, and the way in which we've been talking about gender roles and kind of the fluidity there. It's kind of interesting the way that Xi Jinping is really having this sort of crackdown on cis men, this re-education of masculinity, and sort of this resurgence of what it means to be a man in China. I'm curious to hear you speak a little bit about that. This idea that China is in some ways widening this gender gap, where in a lot of places in the rest of the world it's actually becoming narrower. And so what does that sort of mean, this kind of definition or standard for what it means to be a man or a woman or a girl in China?
I think when we think about where China is in the world, it's not just a geographic distance. Often it's a temporal distance. I think that we need to understand that, when President Obama came into office in 2008, he was adamantly opposed to gay marriage, right? I mean, there is a process that people go through. I mean, and to expect that once we are fully woke here in this country and that we are completely accepting that suddenly that heteronormativity is going to vanish immediately from all other geographies on the planet. That is never going to happen. We want it to move in that direction. I certainly want it to move. It really bothers me to see what's happening in China right now. That level of social conservatism, I don't see, in any means in which in any way in which it's actually productive, and it certainly tarnishes China's global image, or at least its image in the developing world. So, but I think that what's happening right now in China, I think, is that there is this belief, there's this idea that that kind of quote unquote decadence is symptomatic of societies in decline. They really believe, just from their understanding of history, looking at empire in decline. They believe that tolerance of homosexuality, of transvesticism, of things like that are markers of civilizational decline. Somehow they've gotten it into their heads that that's the case. And, I find it, horrifying personally, but I also try to be able to step back and look at it a little more sort of historically and understand. And, I think he's out of touch really with where Chinese society is going. I mean, I remember a time where, homosexuality was considered simply not just a mental disease, but it was actually criminal. We're beyond that now. We have moved, and I don't think that it will be many decades, if even a decade, before we see things like the legalization of gay marriage. I see already making huge progress in other parts of the Sinitic world, like Taiwan especially.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it is important to keep that historical lens and also have the idea of sort of progress as a spectrum and kind of constant evolution kind of along that path. Yeah. Right. I think thinking about China too, kind of thinking again about sort of Korea and its global influence, I want to sort of touch on a couple of questions there. But first, we've got the second question for the poll. I feel like I'm like a little ad sponsor here, so we can go ahead and get that one up, just so folks can see what's going on there. So while that's going on in the background, I was curious. We were just talking about Parasite. Obviously, Squid Game is in the title of this event as well. There's been so much of Korean culture, K-wave, K-pop, that has become widely accepted in the U.S. But there are also a lot of other kind of Sinitic East Asian film, other kind of content that doesn't quite get as much acceptance or really as much screen time. And so I was curious, Minji, from your perspective, what are maybe some of the kind of cultural touch points that really brought on the K-wave phenomenon in the U.S. And why do you think Korea has been able to penetrate this kind of Western market in a way that others perhaps have been less successful?
This is such a large topic. Yeah. I did a little bit of research. I was listening to some other conversations on Hallyu, and it was really enlightening for me. And from what I can say from an anecdotal perspective and being a consumer myself and just watching it and participating with, K-pop concerts coming over to LA, to San Francisco, and hitting me up and asking me to have collaboration, promote these concerts and things like that. I think it's been a very long time in the making, if you will. And I like I was referring to earlier, I was a K-pop fan in the 90s. There was a huge wave that started actually in the late 80s with Soteji, with HOT, with very specific groups that I don't think that they intended for that to make a hit in the States or in Europe or the places that it did. But when it did, I think they saw an opportunity. And because it was coupled with the fact that Korea, I believe, as a government, decided that they wanted to export culture, that they wanted to put in resources and time and effort and energy into, creating, I don't know, people can have their critiques on it, whether, turning their specific culture or commodifying culture and, crafting something that would be palatable to the rest of the world. Either way, whether it was luck and a mix of a concerted effort, I think they succeeded. And those things took time for that to gestate and to become the big wave that it is now. But K-dramas, I mean, I grew up watching them. I actually rented Korean dramas from the Chinese market down the street from where I lived in Cupertino. So there was like, you know, I lived in Cupertino, so I was surrounded by Chinese American kids. But like, it was such a phenomenon for me to share that with my Chinese best friend, that we were both K-pop enthusiasts at 10 years old in Silicon Valley in 1995 and onward. It's crazy to see how that's grown. But, you know, like I said earlier, there's been a lot of investment, I think, what Korea has done, and a lot of study and practice. I mean, the stereotype of Asian Americans really demanding excellence and really putting, you know, their 110% into perfecting something, I think is reflected in that. And there's criticisms on that, including from me, of like, is that really art if you're just trying to formalize something and just saying, okay, we can create a group and put them through a boot camp and, you know, make sure that there's 15. But out of that, there has been so much innovation. They do create a lot of music that's so fun to dance to and becomes a soundtrack of our lives and like touches upon us. And they've created this universe that I think has been so seductive in a way. And it's so engaging. And so I think, yeah, there's a lot of intention and work that went into making that. And then there's a lot of response that came from the audiences and the fandom. And it kind of has just grown over the years. So I'm not as big of a BTS fan. I like some of their songs, I don't know, but like, it's just been really exciting to see, because, you know, while we can have criticisms, it has been a sort of gateway for a lot of people to entertain narratives and perspectives and cultures that they were not interested or curious about in the least before, even if it's just from like the sheer, like, what is this phenomenon, not even being a fan of it, but just being kind of in awe of like, how did this happen? It's inviting a lot more conversation and discovery.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of the convergence of both the sort of a fan base growing to kind of represent or mirror this influx and this just incredible proliferation of art and media and culture that's just exuding out, I think is kind of has become this really perfect marriage. I was curious from your perspective too, Bing, I mean, the sort of the proposals and the individuals who are coming to you for ideas, the way that Goldhouse is thinking about who to collaborate with, you know, Goal Open and everything like that. Has this been a trend that you've seen as well, kind of predominantly a lot more kind of Korean dominated filmmakers or producers who are coming in, who are sort of getting a little bit more airtime, or has it been pretty mixed, kind of like a larger variety?
If we silo by ethnicity, it's been pretty mixed and balanced. I'd say there's still a dearth of Southeast Asian stories that have come to the fore that we're excited to hopefully finance and get out there. And that's for a variety of reasons. But no, I think otherwise it's fairly balanced. I'd also say, I think most importantly for all of us, it's also balanced on size. There's this very annoying debate in the community of, do big budget films matter more or do indie films matter more? And of course, like all things, both matter. Big budgets have just scale and literally marketing machines of $200 million. That's why they look big, but sometimes they can lack the authentic invention and sincerity that indies can actually thrive in, plus the prestige. And so both of those, I think, are really, really important as well. And the good news is we are seeing a good balance of both of those. That's good.
That's really, really great to hear. And so obviously we're thinking about Korean dramas and of course K-pop has really dominated the headlines this year. But of course, you know, China is quietly emerging as a global TV powerhouse, as we've seen in a variety of different forms this year. And I think a trend that will continue. Netflix is obviously picking up a lot more Chinese shows. I was curious from your perspective, Kaiser, you know, will the next Squid Game be made in China? Is there a growing sense that, you know, there was a comment in the chat as well that, you know, China is terrible at promoting its own soft power. Is that changing from the way you see things based on the media that's being put out right now?
Unfortunately, no. I think it's actually going in the wrong direction. China does not punch even close to its weight globally right now. I think the problem is, well, I mean, like Fight Club, the first rule of soft power is don't talk about soft power. China talks insistently, you know, and incessantly about soft power, which is probably what's getting in its way. I think the main problem, of course, is that cultural power is produced at the periphery and it comes from the grassroots. It's not ever a top-down kind of directed thing. I think this is a very fundamental misconception, and it's going to cripple, I think, China in its efforts to project as it has. If we look back, those times where Chinese cultural products have had significant impact outside, it's been in periods of political loosening. It's been in periods of more specifically cultural tolerance and more sort of openness. Now, I think that this is, I think it's deeply problematic, but even more so is there is an aesthetic divergence that's happening. If you look at the films that really make it in China, American audiences, global audiences, well, not global audiences. There will be other audiences in other parts of the developing world in Southeast Asia where there will be a connection, but not to the developed world. The audiences, the aesthetic preferences have diverged wildly. And I chalk this up to a bunch of different things, but one problem, I mean, even things like crackdowns on intellectual property violations. I believe very strongly in something called what I call seed piracy. I mean, if it weren't for the mad proliferation of VCDs and then DVDs in China in the 1990s, there wouldn't have even been that kind of an appetite for American televisual products. I think it's really unfortunate. I think, in something I've been involved in rock music, that was certainly the case. I think we shoot ourselves in the foot when we get too uptight about that money we might be losing from disc piracy in China. It's been a number of factors, but it doesn't look good.
Yeah, I was reminded too of a podcast that you were recently a part of, Kaiser Mixtape, and sort of thinking about the proliferation of music even then. And of course, that kind of throughout this idea of propriety and kind of intellectual property, this kind of things were just copied, kind of endlessly over time. But that of course led to this kind of incredible uptake in kind of alternative music within China scene, which maybe wouldn't have happened had things been really tighter and more tightly controlled.
But that died very quickly, and and that's another factor. Is this is the stage where China is right now? People are not interested in art so much as in entertainment right now. There are not a lot of quality, honestly, just not a lot of quality films or televisual products coming out. I have a lot of family that's in the entertainment world. Good screenwriters cannot find work right now. They want the most shallow, kind of just frivolous material content. It's truly awful.
Yeah. No, absolutely, that is true. Yeah, I wanted to talk about other struggling artists who can't find work. John Cho, no, not someone who would necessarily associate with that at all. But I do find that it was interesting. About 2 or 3 years ago, there was this great movement. I think we'll have a visual that'll come up as well. This kind of hashtag that started, I believe it was 2018. This kind of idea of starring John Cho. This idea that Asian American actors have always, been sidelined to the role of kind of sidekicks and never been in the starring lights. The idea that we're actually going to put an Asian American face in the lead role, and once that's sort of seen, it can't be unseen. That's sort of this cultural phenomenon that, once it gets going, we're really going to develop some momentum around that. And so, Ben, I guess I was curious from your perspective, has that been, the case? Has there been kind of an increased emphasis on this? How do we put more Asian actors and actresses into lead roles, and do we need more institutions like Goldhouse or Asian American owned and led studios in order to promote our own narratives?
Yeah, and Will Yu, who I think hilariously just made the blacklist and is like writing his own history, as it were, or his own like manifestation, did a really brilliant job with this campaign. And he represents a lot of the solution, which is first and foremost, we need to invest in producers, and then second of tantamount importance in writer-directors. And that multi-hyphenate writer-director, also known as a filmmaker, is really, really, really important. Number one is producers just don't get public credit because they're candidly doing so much of the work end to end. They're the ones who develop the scripts. They are the ones who find financing. They're the ones who distribute, and they're just not given the celebrity that candidly directors are for unbeknownst reasons to me. There is an enormous dearth of Asian producers in Hollywood, period, across TV and film. The good news is we do have a lot of great ones. Nini Bon Jovi is one of the most successful producers in independent film history, is also my partner on my film fund, or I should say I'm her partner. She's my superior on this for sure. But we just need to invest in more. It's also hilariously a somewhat pragmatic career path. It's not as, I'll say, volatile as being a traditional creative, because the producer is so close to business. So for very scared conservative parents, know that there will be a meal ticket that's somewhat controllable on that end. The second piece is there's so many great programs to invest in writers, directors, and so forth. So Goldhouse just partnered up with Netflix and Tribeca. It's called the Future Gold Film Fellowship. We're going to make the careers of the next Chloe Zhao's writer, directors as hybridizations. And I think that hybridization is really important, because you can't just write something and expect someone to make it. You, at this point, have to also make it. And again, I'm not requiring that of every writer, but the more that we have these polymaths, the more and faster we'll be able to produce. Another great example is CAPE, which I also serve on the board of, has the market, not even our communities, but the market's leading writing fellowship as well as executive fellowship, not just investing in screenwriters, but also the greenlighters, who are often forgotten, right? The people with the purse strings, as it were. And so investing in programs like that, again, on the producer and filmmaker side is important. I think the final piece, you already know my answer, Daniel, this of what is the path forward. We have to own our own independent studios end to end. There's no question, from development, production, all the way to being inventive with distribution beyond theatrical. I'm particularly inspired by the volume of Asians who have pioneered various distribution platforms, whether it's YouTube or Twitch or Pinterest or Snap, all Asian founded, or Twitter, now Asian chiefed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we need to lean into that strength. The other side, though, of course, is we also need to be complicit in the improvement within the established system. Goldhouse does now work with every major Hollywood studio and streamer, and I can tell you definitively, they give a real damn about getting authenticity right. Are they going to get it right every time? No. This is the way the system works. Rome was not built in a day. Earth was built in 6, right? And so it does take time to get there, but we are definitely getting there.
That's great, Ben. Yeah, and I really appreciate your thoughts in terms of that path forward, and absolutely agree. I mean, I think it takes more of those kind of polymaths, as you mentioned, folks who are able to do multiple things at once, as well as just owning the end-to-end production. I was curious about throwing that question both to you, Minji, as well as to you, Kaiser, kind of this idea of, what is the path forward? This increased attention on Asian American and AAPI representation is really wonderful, but is it sustainable? Is it a flash in the pan? How do we keep up this trend of long-term viability and visibility?
Absolutely.
It's not really something that I've thought of, and I'm listening to these ideas that are being floated right now, and I'm finding them very, very appealing. I mean, I have, like I said, family. It just strikes me that, for example, my very talented first cousin, Arvin Chen, who's a filmmaker, he in his age, he had to go to Taiwan, where he's put out a couple of features. He's got a show that's been greenlit for one of the big streaming services. He's got a lot of stuff going on, but I don't see. Yeah, I mean, he's not part of so far some collaborative effort with a lot of other Asian American filmmakers. I mean, people all the way up and down the value chain. I think that's what Bing is talking about right now is an extremely appealing idea to me. I would love to see that happen and see more people get behind that. No, this is not in my wheelhouse. I don't have any kind of recommendations for the salvation of Asian American representation or identity in Hollywood.
No, that's fine. That's why that question's for Minji.
Yeah.
Well, Kaiser, I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit. I think that you're absolutely part of the solution and the strategy, because to supplement what Bing said, because I absolutely 100% agree with him and support the organizations that he mentioned. Coming from the performer side, my work with collaboration has been working with independent artists. These are the people. Collaboration. We hosted showcases since 2000, pre-social media, pre-internet. Quite frankly, Randall Park rapped on our stages. Ali Wong hosted our shows. Stephen Yun was on stage with a guitar before he became, Glenn. And every artist has a beginning too, and there needs to be a lot of support for the people to play the roles that are being written, produced, and all this effort to fund them. I'll say that as an actor standpoint, I started in musical theater since I was 5 years old. But my path was I was shifted towards the medical career, not because of my parents, because I thought that's the way that I can succeed in life. And I had this dream of wanting to be an actor and a filmmaker. I wanted to work on these films, but I just didn't see any examples ahead of me. So that being said, if you don't see people, again, it's a chicken or egg thing. People can be the trailblazer, but it takes a lot of resources. And it takes a lot of study for artists to be at the level to perform and compete in an arena. I'm not saying art is a competition, but if we're trying to make the best of the best, we can't remove that element from it. And I care about creating quality films. And for me as a filmmaker, fledgling filmmaker, I want to have good actors play the roles that I want to create. And so I can say that as an actor and as an artist, you're hustling so hard and you're having to do a lot of different things, doing your pay to play, casting websites that cost money every single month, getting proper headshots, upwards of $1,000 now in Los Angeles, which is, I think is exploitative and ridiculous. But you're trying to take acting classes. We're trying to play in the Olympics, and there are people that have never even gotten in the pool yet to do a lap.
Right.
right? So there needs to be that training, and that I'm a big, my father raised me to be a believer in the 10,000 hours. Don't expect, excellence. If something that you tried once, maybe you are the prodigy and you can just like become the best Oscar winning actor from your first film. But a lot of people, in general can't. It's a skill, it's an art, it's a craft, and it's something that needs to be honed. And so I think other investments that can go into the artists themselves to do that. And then also, sorry, to supplement that, on the kind of ecosystem, having proper publicists, having proper managers who can navigate the deals and the negotiations and the promotion of the films that are, once they're done, having proper critics, journalists, podcasters who can elevate these stories and give spotlight to something that other people don't deem to be worth airtime. That matters, it matters so much. And I've been able to hear all these stories and experiences from people that are in the films, making the films, and promoting the films. And that's why I've been so fortunate to be in this community and to learn at every angle what it takes to take even like a stellar film, but to like rise above the din of all the noise in Hollywood to make a splash, to have relevance, to be, in front of our eyeballs, because there's so much competing for our attention from a lot of different industries, not just from film, from tech, from politics, from, everything, from our own families, right? So I just think I encourage everybody at whatever point people want to contribute to the conversation and to the elevation. I think there are many, many, many moving parts. And that's, I think, again, I land on, that's exciting, because if you don't want to be in front of camera and you don't want to work for a studio, there's a lot of other things that people can do to move that needle. And I call upon everybody to do that. Like we do need all hands on deck, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah. I absolutely agree, Minji. Yeah. I mean, I think there is a role for everyone to play, for everyone who wants to be involved in this process. And I'm so grateful to, programs like you're mentioning, being like Gold House is doing for that sort of explicit training. Because I do think, so often we may have these passions or these interests, but there often isn't a place for us to actually learn the skills that we need to actually get those 10,000 hours and really develop to the next level. So more programs and more people who are willing to serve as mentors in that capacity, I think will be really incredible for the strength of this community. So thank you all so much. We've only got about 10 minutes. So I want to have the chance to let audience folks jump in with questions of their own. And there's been some great comments in the chat as well as in the Q&A. So I'll just kind of go through a couple of those questions and kind of leave them open for anyone who might be interested in jumping in. But one was, in the 70s, Bruce Lee had a major impact on ideas about Asian masculinity as a fighter. But again, kind of similar to the way we've seen Shang-Chi now, no love interest or no explicit opportunity for romance, between him and another lead. Was Bruce Lee kind of too early? Was he before his time? Was it too early in the Asian American movement? Is there that opportunity that, if Bruce Lee were alive today, would some of those ideas around his movies and his roles maybe change as a result of the times?
Well, I can jump in. I mean, I have always been really conflicted about the sort of prominence that martial arts has played in East Asian cultural export. On the one hand, it's fucking cool, and on the other hand, I think that it's limiting. I think that it does create a not entirely negative, but a stereotype, right? And it pigeonholes certain actors. I think everyone should read. There's this fantastic little book, and I'm spacing the name of the author right now, but it's called Interior Chinatown. If you haven't read that, please read that. It's a very, very short read. Charles Yu, yeah. I'm sorry, somebody in fantastic. It's great. I love watching, in Warrior, in the first episode of Warrior, when, he kicks the shit out of a bunch of white, bullies. There's something viscerally satisfying about this. Of course there is. And it does feel empowering. At the same time, I think, we've got to transcend that. We need to have them, in different types of roles, and women as well. I mean, I'm very conflicted about this. I don't know how the two of you feel.
I think I have a specific paradigm of I don't believe that there's a wrong or a bad timing. I think things happen more or less as they should, and or what's the point in arguing that? I think that Bruce Lee was an incredible force of nature as an artist, as a martial artist, as a person. And I thank Bruce Lee for setting us up to do it with, like, we're on the, like, we hear that comment of like, we stand on the shoulders of giants. He was a giant. And if he hadn't been who he is and what he is at the time that he is and said what he did, we wouldn't be here today doing what we were able to do. And I don't know how it would have turned out otherwise. So for me personally, I don't think it was before his time. I think he was just a freaking badass trailblazer. And I'm really fucking happy that he existed.
Oh, me too.
He did. Yeah,
Absolutely. I adore him. I mean,
yeah, great hero of mine too. Yeah. Bing, did you want to weigh in?
I have nothing else to add, plus one to what said. Yeah.
really, I mean, yours was the perspective I was really most waiting to hear. But you sure you have nothing to add?
y'all did too well. No, I just like it's yes, gratitude. Everything needs to begin with a first or a baseline. But I don't know, if my mother here, she'd say, "Why are you looking backwards?
Right.
Look forward." That we don't control any of that. Who cares? You know. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I'm seeing in the chat. I assume that it's Peter Shao from Immortal Studios, who's typing under the name. He's been doing absolutely great stuff for this. I mean, because I think this is something really important. The whole genre of wuxia from China, that is much more than just kung fu-y. It's a lot more than that. I mean, there are philosophical systems behind it, and I'm really glad that the work that they're doing in really foregrounding a lot of the other stuff, not just the kicking of ass, which is important. And as somebody commented, not much more masculine than there's nothing more masculine than ass kicking.
I could argue that. That's another conversation, Kaiser.
Right. I'm exaggerating. There are plenty of things that are more masculine, but
yeah, for sure. And I think what Bing was saying earlier is like that we're at a point in kind of the grander conversation, not just about racial identity, but just in terms of gender, right? There's so much expansion that's been happening, and I'm very happy to see and witness that and listen to it and contribute to it, because I think these conversations may be becoming quickly obsolete because our understandings, our depictions, and our representations of gender. And I'll say that even from like what K-pop has been offering in terms of, making people wonder and question. And also, I'll plug a friend of mine, David Yee, who is the founder of Very Good Light. It's a beauty brand, and he is a queer man, but he has also been degenderizing beauty and give some historical context of like how people have approached gender, beauty, beautifying oneself, self-care. Those have shifted like the wind over so many different, cultures and so many countries and so many generations. We're just in this particular one. I think if we even widen the scope and we do take a moment to look back, though I mostly agree with Bing's mom, like, let's look forward, but there's a lot to learn. Like, we're thinking very small. I think if we just zoom out, this is a very now conversation, and a very, maybe the last like 100, 150 years conversation. We look at how it has been historically. Men used to wear makeup, men have worn dress, you know what I mean? Like, our definitions are very narrow, I feel like. And I'm glad that conversation's happening.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, I think, taking sort of the wider view, I think will be important too. And I think we're living in this very historical time too, when, obviously perceptions can change on a dime. We've seen, obviously, there's been a latent sense of course, stereotypes that have existed against Asian Americans since, dawn immemorial. But, this idea that as a result of the pandemic, they've really been brought to the surface. And I think one of the questions that was interesting here from the Q&A was, how do we, as viewers, make sure this openness to Asian actors and actresses continues to last, that there isn't something kind of fleeting about this where suddenly our perception can change, and suddenly Asian America writ large kind of gets denigrated or cast in a negative light. I don't know if any of you had any thoughts on kind of that feeling as well.
Bing, man, you haven't spoken in a while.
No, we have to, I mean, y'all know the answer. We have to do everything that we mentioned. I think the one that we haven't spent enough time on is distribution. Whoever controls the pipe controls behavior and perception, period. I saw in the chat someone was mentioning Warrior and saying that public outcry is effective. It is, but I can tell you that's not why it got renewed. Warrior was renewed because Shannon and Justin were privately pushing for a very long time with HBO throughout the acquisition, which is the worst time, by the way, to push for anything because no one wants to commit to anything, right? So good on them and their fortitude. They kept pushing and pushing and pushing. Now, the good news is it takes creative commitment for a studio and a distributor to even think about greenlighting something, right? Like Watchmen's the best example of this. HBO, to their credit, is not going to greenlight until the creators are coming back. But that is only half the battle. The other half is distribution, because the reality is we can talk all about representation matters, but unless the dollars show it, unless eyeballs show it, it doesn't. And so Katie Sue, who, as you can surmise from her last name, who's an Asian woman, was actually CMO of HBO Max. So guess what Katie did? Katie looked at the numbers and saw for some reason that this show called Warrior, that this is before like the petition or whatever online was going out. She had noticed that Warrior was actually taking off a little bit, specifically with non-Asian audiences. Mm-hmm. So what do you do as a good CMO? You look where audiences are engaging and you prioritize it and then put editorial dollars behind it. So she started actually, I don't want to say manufacture because there's already organic groundswell, but gave it a little push and flamed the fire a little bit more behind Warrior. Before you know it, Warrior is doing very well on HBO Max. This coincided, of course, with, again, Justin Shannon pushing it forward on the creative end. Fast forward, there was a meeting with Kilar and so forth to say, look, we're in the middle of the Stop Asian movement. The numbers justify it. The creative wants it. And by the way, yes, the fans do too. But it was in that order, to be very clear, that got this renewed. Right. And so I think distribution and really honoring those who have their own platforms, the CMO of IMAX is Asian, by the way, Denny too, celebrating people like him and making sure that we can push forward more stories on that end is something that is of tantamount importance to having a great pipeline of strong creative.
Great, Bing. I've got one more question that I want to ask all of you. But before that, I want to reveal the great reveal of our poll results. I don't know if we're able to do that. Where has public opinion fallen? Pretty split. All right. Asian American visibility in America, a split between a blessing and a mixed blessing. Fewer on the curse front. And then for our second poll question, increased prominence of Asian men in American culture has made dating easier. Things are about the same. Maybe your son is an outlier there, Kaiser. So we'll talk about that.
I think it's a generational thing for sure.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I've been on my friends' dating apps for them. And
ought to be 17 again.
That's a whole other conversation. Yeah. One last thing before you all go, and I'm so grateful for all of your time. And it's been such a pleasure to be with you all here today. One question that I thought was really interesting from the Q&A was, what would you like to see as the next great Asian role or character in American cinema? If it could be anyone, who is your dream, star, kind of archetype?
Besides like a former rock star turned podcast host, or
hey, that works.
Obviously.
I mean,
yeah.
What are they thinking?
I can go first. So one of my best friends, Prabhu Grung, who's a designer and one of the foremost leaders of, I think, the Asian multicultural movement in fashion, often says, until we can celebrate mediocrity, we have not arrived. And I love that so much. And I'm not going to pick on any traditional incumbent or whatever, but until we can put crap out there and have it be celebrated, we are still struggling.
There was a fantastic article about that, talking about the Black community. And I mean, that I've been looking for the right place to raise that, but you just didn't. And absolutely, we need to be able to put out mediocre crap and still have that celebrated. And I guess that's kind of what you were getting at with talking about not airing the critique publicly. And yeah, and you're right. We could let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? Or the mediocre even. Fantastic.
Thanks, Bing. Minji, any thoughts from your end?
What do I want to see?
Yeah.
I personally, I would love to see Asian American. This is not about film and TV, but musicians. I think that there's a connection I'm surrounded by insanely talented Asian American musicians, many that have even written and produced for non-Asian artists, but they themselves have been told by record labels to their face, I don't know how to market you. I don't know what I'm going to do with you. I had a talk with Randy Jackson to his face because he was praising some Indonesian artists. And I was like, that's incredible. But you also know that we have domestic talent too. And you don't need to bring them from overseas to make a splash in the US. And we had a whole conversation about that. I would really love to see Asian American artists thrive and be accepted for the brilliant, talented people that they are, and not be relegated to the margins or having to make art for others.
That's perfect, Minji. So yeah, maybe either collaboration or Goldhouse can produce the the Kaiser Kuo biopic, artists, musicians into the forefront. So I'll leave that to all of you to discuss offline. But once again, thank you so much, Bing, Minji, Kaiser, for engaging in this conversation. It's been really a joy. And thank you for everyone who's been able to tune in today. We're so grateful for your time. And wishing everyone an early happy holidays and a wonderful new year. We'll drop some more things in the chat for more information about all of the relevant organizations that have been seen here today. But yeah, thank you all so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Daniel.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, Sandra. And great to meet you both, Bing and Minji.
Yeah, great to connect with you.
All right, thank you all.